Good morning, Facebook friends. We're getting assembled here, and I'm trying a new location because I recognize that when I look at this group, then you're like seeing this side of me all the time. So I'm trying something new to see how it goes. I've got my camera in a different place, but we're gonna get into lesson. So this is part 1, lesson 4. And then next week we will actually, good morning Lisa, we will be starting part 2, lesson 1. So we'll actually go back to a lesson 1. And I just want to give you guys a heads up as we're just seamlessly going from part 1 to part 2. And so next week when you start your work, it'll say for new students to Genesis, start here. For continuing students, start here. So just skip the new student part because we've already, that will be some work that you already have done. And then just go to the continuing students and we'll pick up there. So, sound good? Perfect. Okay. All right. You ready to have a word of prayer and jump into this? This is the exciting. My son Alex came in here and he's like, "It's Tuesday, Mom. Are you ready to do this?" Pow pow. Because my family has known that this is kind of a challenging. I think it's going to be great. I think we're going to have a great discussion, though. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's have a word of prayer, and we'll jump in. Holy Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to gather this morning, Lord. Thank you for those who are just continuing to study and to seek you as we shelter in place. I thank you, as always, for this group that I'm able to just study with and talk with and learn from. And I do just lift up our lesson today, Lord, and just pray, God, that you will continue, as you always do with us, Lord. Just continue to move our hearts and our spirits just in alignment with yours, Lord. Just help us to, not just today, but any day that we're confronted with something that we just pause and say, I don't know for sure that I understand that, or I don't know if I think about that the way I used to, whatever, Lord. We just lift that up to you and just thank you for your willingness to honor our questions and our doubts and our wrestlings, always, Lord. And so, again, just thank you for this time this morning, Lord, and just help our conversation be fruitful. And we lift this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, before we do, good morning, Maria. Before we jump into just a little bit of review, do we need to do anything on the at-a-glance? I had forgotten if we've been keeping up. I know we're only on chapter 2, but does anybody need anything filled in on your at-a-glance for where we are right now?
I don't have anything for chapter 2.
Okay, good to know. Hey, either Lisa or Maria, will you type a comment again today, Lisa, maybe just so I can see that I know that I can see the comments. I appreciate that if you'll do that. Okay, so chapter 1, I have God creates heaven, earth, and life, although we continue to like Mary Ellen's better. I'm going to write hers down. What's yours again for chapter 1, Mary Ellen?
God made heaven, earth, and spoke creation into existence.
God made heaven, earth, and spoke creation into existence. Yeah, I'm probably not going to write all that down right now. I'll just keep asking you. I'll just keep Mary Ellen's. And then for chapter 2, I have God gives Adam a home and a partner.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, thanks. God gives Adam a home and a partner. Yes, Maria, thank you for typing that. I can see the comment. There was one day a couple weeks ago that people were commenting, and I realized later that I never saw them, so I just am checking now. So God gives Adam a home and a partner. Anybody else have something different or better? It's fine to say, yes, I have something better. Something different. Okay.
Rich just tried to call me, so call her back and come to the Bible.
I thought she was talking to me, but she's not. All right, so at a glance is good. And then let's jump off and look at page 63 in your lesson, if you got that far, because there was a little comparison between chapter 1 and chapter 2. You guys see where I am? I thought, by way of review, we'll just kind of talk through this little chart right here on page 63. Comparison of Genesis 1 and 2. And in your own words, if you had to say what's like what's different between one or two, or why would we even need to compare them or whatever. Overall, what would you say is either some like trouble spots or some yes, I can see yours too, Lisa. Trouble spots or differences or anything like that in chapters 1 and 2?
I don't know that it was a trouble spot, but I would I guess just generally, it seemed like 2 went into much more detail about man,
Yeah.
the creation of man.
Yes. Yes.
As opposed to the universe.
Yes. Right. So the first, yeah, go ahead.
Elohim and the Yahweh,
Yes.
the supreme God in
Yes.
1 and
Yes.
the personal name of God in 2.
Yes. Yes. I like that. We spent a little bit of time on that last week. That we talked about how the Elohim was because we're I'm so interested in continuing to just think about this word bara, this creator, this idea that there's something that only God can do, and he can make something out of nothing, or he can make something, he can transform something that currently exists into something different or better, right? This bara, creator. And we talked about him in a plural sense, like the Trinity in 1. And then we talked about him in addition to that, because then it said Lord God. Remember how in chapter 2 it starts saying Lord God. So in addition to this creator of the universe, there's also this personal creator, this Yahweh, Lord God. It's translated to Lord. Yeah.
Angie, I meant to look it up and I didn't, so I probably don't know whether I should even say this. But
No, it's good.
The Yahweh, maybe you remember something about it, that they were not allowed to speak it. Do you?
Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I
Which
meant to look it up and I forgot to, and I was trying to remember. I think it was the Yahweh. That's why they used, or they couldn't say Jehovah, so they used. No, I think it was Yahweh. They could not say because it was so holy.
there was some, I don't remember which one, but you're right, and that also has something to do with why there's no vowels in it when they write it, right? It has something to do with that too.
What they do.
Yes, yes. Yeah, Maria says chapter 1 is about the how and chapter 2 is about the why. I like the way that Maria has said that too. Yeah. So let's just for the things that we haven't talked about yet, that's a good point about the Yahweh. I'm going to actually get out a sticky note and make myself a note about that, because now I want to.
I meant to look it up because I did that Bible study. And
I have read that too, Mary Ellen, and now I can't remember exactly what that is about. So which of the 6 days, you see where I am on 63, which of the 6 days of creation are discussed in each chapter? So I put all 6 days in both boxes, and I added in review in chapter 2. So chapter 1 I just put all 6 days, and then I put chapter 2 all 6 days in review, because it kind of just does it real quick, right? And then it talks about the 7th day in chapter 2. And then what is the central focus or perspective of each chapter? I put for chapter 1, the central focus is the creation of all things equally, like a narrative, like just like what Maria said was the how, this day 1 how, day 2 how, day 3 how. And then chapter...
God speaking things into creation.
God speaking things into creation, right.
Yeah. And then the order.
The intentional order is something that still is, that's something that's really standing out to me. And again, and I've said this before, but for me, I say things multiple times because then it solidifies in my heart more. So if we take this bara creator, God spoke into existence, this Elohim bara creator, and the intentionality in which he creates the earth, so that whatever is created next, the environment for that new creation is already present, right? And then if we take that and apply it to the personal Jehovah God, can we not assume that the same is true? That whatever he is creating in us, he has prepared the environment for us, so that whatever he brings to new creation in us, the environment is already there for us. That's the personal Jehovah bara creator in us. That's how we get the same, that's how we use the same word, I think, in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, right? And I think about it in my own life even, and how I'm sure I'm the only one who ever does this, but how I get impatient with the waiting. And I don't recognize the waiting as such a gift, because in the waiting, he is creating the environment in which is necessary for whatever he is bringing, whatever else he is creating in my life, so that when that appears, or that opportunity is there, or that even obstacle, or whatever's happening, I will have everything I need to be able to deal with, handle, accept, roll with, whatever, however you want to. Do we trust that the environment is created? On Sunday for church, I've been working through the I am statements of Jesus, and Sunday was I am the resurrection, and we talked about the Lazarus story in John 11. You guys know that story probably, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And the one thing that stuck out to me as I was studying that story to prepare for Sunday that I had never seen before is that there's this, Jesus is told that Lazarus is sick, right? And then please come because Lazarus is sick. And then the scripture tells us, it says something like this. I'm going to not say it exactly right, but it says how Jesus loved them so. Jesus loved them very much. And the next verse says, so he delayed. And I always, in my mind, I always heard it say, but he delayed, as in he loved them, but he still did this. And in the Amplified Bible, it says, Jesus loved them, so he delayed. As in there's this intentional purpose in the delay. Because God was doing something so much bigger with Lazarus' life than saving him from death. God was doing something amazing so that not only Lazarus, but everyone who witnessed would see this amazing thing that God did in Lazarus' life. So, because he was already dead, right? Does that make sense? He loved them, so he delayed. And I was convicted by it, or not even convicted so much as just whatever. I'm just open to a new understanding, whatever word we would use for that. To be how many times has God delayed in your life because he loves you? Not because he forgot you. Not because he overlooked your request or your need, not because he didn't understand, not because whatever, fill in the blank of these things that, we're tempted to believe when God doesn't act the way we want him to act. And I don't know. Anyway, for what it's worth, I just thought that goes along with what we're studying, for me anyway, that sort of this bara creator with this intentionality. And sometimes the intentionality, because God knows best, the best thing to do for you, Angie, is nothing. As mad as it makes us. As frustrated as we get, right? He loved her, so he delayed, right? So anyway, all right. Oh, that's just free extra. So record the third block on this page 63. Record the meaning of the name of God used in each chapter. Helen introduced this just a second ago. The Elohim is the plural God, or the Trinity, and the Yahweh, Jehovah, is the personal God. And then, and plus there's just this incredible understanding of the vastness. The God that created the universe creates a mighty work in me as well. If he can do that, then what is it in my life that I think he cannot do, right? A lot. Apparently, I'm not, there's a lot. 2 different verbs are used for God's creating activities in chapters 1 and 2. Record the definition of each chart. Here's the bara that we were just talking about. Created. Only God can create, either from nothing or from rebuilding, is the way I put that. And the yatsar, mold into a form, especially like a potter. So it's so one of them almost, the bara almost seems like the initial creation, right? And then the yatsar almost seems like the recreation or the continual creation.
I had with bara.
Yeah.
That it's always about God and only God can do.
Yes. Yeah. Only God can. Yeah, that was a part of that bara. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the yatsar, I thought it reminded me, well, of course, the movie Ghost.
Yes.
Squeezing into shape, molding.
Yeah. Lisa, did you hear Did you hear Mary Ellen talk about Ghost? Lisa and I were just talking about Ghost the other day. Lisa Marie and I were just talking about Ghost. Yes, because Lisa loves that movie and I don't really love it so much, and so it's so funny because we were laughing about that. So, anything else on that? That comparison chart thing right there. Let's flip back to page 54 and look at the one thing we looked up. Page 54, number 3. Good morning, Dana. Page 54, number 3, Matthew 19:4 and 5. The question is, from what chapters is Jesus quoting? And he's quoting from both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. You remember that when he says, when he talks about that? And then the question is, does it seem like Jesus is referring to two contradictory creation accounts? Kind of asking that question. What do you guys think? No? Yeah.
No.
I didn't think so either. But it's interesting how I had never really thought of that before, like looking at the differences between Genesis 1 and 2, and then hearing Jesus use them in response to something seamlessly as if there is no difference, which kind of just goes back to kind of what Maria was saying and what we were saying earlier, that it's really, it seems to be, most things point to the fact that 2 is like, here's more to this, here's the rest of the story. You know, here's like the scientific basics, like how, like Maria said, and then here's a little bit more of the why or the backstory to that. So. How about page, anything else on that, the differences, before we kind of go into the new stuff this week? Let's start on page 64, if you were able to get that filled out this week. And let's just look at the differences, the relationship between God and man and God and woman, and the relationship they have between each other and the relationship they have to creation. We're just going to kind of unpack that a little bit. So what in that first box, and I'm going to show this to you guys so that it's page 64 if you have, it looks like this. Oh, let's see. My light is so bright. There it is, that box. What in that first box, what did you write down about God's relationship to male? What did you pull out in there?
Created in God's image.
Created in God's image.
Placed in the garden.
Yep.
He blessed them,
Yep.
gave him rule over all the earth.
Yep.
And food.
And I have all those things, and to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I added, yeah. Anything else in that box between God and male? How about go down then, and God and female?
Pretty much the same thing.
Helper.
He came from man's rib.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't have anything different. I had created in the image, blessed, and gave food.
And she was to help rule over the earth, too.
That's right. And I put that actually under the creation. It doesn't matter. Like, I put that because it can be either place because God gave them the ability to create, rule over. But then I use that under the creation one, but it doesn't matter at all. Yeah, as long as we're pulling out the things. How about between one another? What was the male's relationship to the female? That would be the middle box on the top.
Well,
Formed first and formed from the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the New
God-
Testament text, it says he was head of the woman, and then later on it says that she came from him, but then now man comes from woman because through birth.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have that, too.
I have that he called woman his equal. And I have that because, well, maybe because I'm Angie, but because in 23, chapter 2:23, the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man."
Yeah, I had bone of his bone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's you consider that he's saying equal to him.
I am. I'm not going to try to convince you.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
I don't have an agenda. I have for one another. I have that he was joined with the woman, and then in the middle box on the bottom, I have that she was the Ezer, E-Z-E-R for man. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. I think we looked that up this week. That's the word for helper that the NASB used for helper. E-Z-E-R, that's the Hebrew word. And then that she was made from the rib. Somebody said that already. And then joined with the man. And we'll look at this a little bit more, but it talks about how there will be one flesh. 24. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and then shall become one flesh. And the man and wife are both naked and not ashamed. And I think that definitely is about sexual intimacy, but I think it's more than that also, in my opinion. Someone else said I do too. Yeah, I think
Yeah, I do.
I think that one of the reasons that God is so particular about our sexual behavior is because it's about so much more than our bodies, right? That's what I believe. I mean, He's not particular about the sexual behavior of animals, right? Because they're mating to have more animals, right? But we mate, if you will, for different reasons than that. And I believe that's one of the reasons that God is so particular or cautionary or instructional, whatever wording right we want to use, about our sexual behavior, because it's not just about our bodies as humans. And so
They become one flesh is what they
one flesh, yes, yeah,
one flesh.
but not just for a moment, I would
Yeah.
argue, right? Not just for a moment, but for which is one of the reasons that I think that we're supposed to be so careful, because you don't ever undo that, right? I mean, you're just that's always a relationship.
To live together, to work together.
Yes.
Everything is together as one.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's what he's trying to tell us.
Yeah. Did any of you read I posted on the Facebook page, one of the other precept students had sent me a blog about the I know Lisa made a comment about it, and Donna Lynn, I think, made a comment about it also, so I know a couple of you guys read it. I just did it maybe yesterday because one of the precept students sent it to me, and if you haven't read it and you're on the Facebook page, I encourage you to look at it, or I can email it to you if you want it. But it was really interesting. I didn't print it out, so I won't quote it exactly right, but it was a different take on the whole idea of two become one, because there was an understanding by this Bible researcher, scholar, that when it says that in chapter 1, when it says they're created male and female, help me find that so we can, it's like at the end, right? Well, of course it's the end because it's day 7.
27.
Thank you. 20. Oh, I'm in chapter 2. That's why I can't find it. 1:27. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created him. He was saying that there's some understanding that they were created as like one thing initially, male and female together, and then separated. And because of the Hebrew word, and again, I'll email it to you if you want it, but it's on the Facebook page. And then the idea then is that he separated them, and so the joining of them back together is his design for them, so that they're like together again. It was really interesting. I know Lisa read it and commented on it, and if you have anything to add to that, but I would encourage you to take a look. And the thing that I said when I posted it is, because we're gonna talk about marriage and some things today, but the thing that I said is, I just think it's really good to read what other like smart people know about things, especially when we hit up against a difficult topic and we're trying to unpack it and find some understanding around it. So anyway, page 37, that was like last week or week before, where we looked up the word man. Do you remember that? Adam was the word man. You don't have to go there right now, and it generally refers to mankind. But then this week on page 55, we looked up male and female. So there is this separation of like, and I think it kind of goes to what this author was saying. If mankind is like one thing, and then a little bit later on, we're creating male and female, as in I created mankind, and now I'm separating them, male and female, then there would be like a natural understanding that then they come back together at some point, right? So male and female, did you learn anything? That is page 55, 1A and B. Anything that was interesting to you or stood out to you in that?
Nope.
No, it was very straightforward, wasn't it? It's about like it's about the differences in our body, basically, right? Like
Yeah.
Man, Zakar was like somehow marked as to be recognized. The female was, did you pick up on that, like to puncture female from the sexual form? I thought that was interesting. So it's really just talking about the fact that our bodies are different and they have different purposes and uses. Yeah. And then woman at the bottom of that was about together or wife.
I had wife, betrothed,
Uh-huh.
womanhood.
Uh-huh. And what are they told to do, male and female, in Genesis 1:28? You probably don't even have to look, but
Be fruitful and multiply.
be fruitful and multiply. And, obviously, to continue the race, both are needed, right? I mean, I think that's probably something we can all just like, hey, there's common ground. We can all agree on that. We need us both to keep moving forward, right? Yeah. Then Genesis 2:18-25. This is where the account of God making woman from Adam's rib. And page 56, number 4, we spent some time looking up what this idea of helper was. What did you find for 56, number 4? What did you find as the idea for helper?
She's a perfect complement,
A perfect complement, yeah. Mm-hmm.
made in the same image of God,
Made in the same image.
given the same commission and obligated by the same prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
Man cannot fulfill his created purpose alone.
Mm-hmm. Man cannot fulfill his created purpose alone. I first was introduced to this word Ezer. I should have looked this up, but it's just popping into my head right now. Last summer when I was at the She Speaks conference, I don't know if I told you guys about going to North Carolina last July. And She Speaks is a product of Proverbs 31 Ministries. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Lisa Turkhurst is the head of Proverbs 31 Ministry. Anyway, and there was a woman there. Her name was Wendy, and I can't think of her last name right now, but she was one of the most powerful preachers I have ever heard. I would have listened to her all day long. She was just awesome. And she did a lesson on Proverbs 31 and how so often we take Proverbs 31 as kind of this, subdued, docile, is that the right word? Kind of, servant. And while none of that is, wrong necessarily, she was talking about the word used for, there's something about the word either used for her husband or her children or whatever, but that is translated, this word Ezer is translated to. And it's translated like helper, like we think about helper, like just whatever I need to help you do so that you can have what you want sort of thing. And she's like, it's not like that at all. It is a warrior. It is a strong warrior that can be strong and rise up when someone else is weak. And so I wrote down some other things about Ezer, this word. It talks about, R. David Friedman says, it is fully equal and fully his match. It is related to power and strength. Part of what the word means is to rescue and save and be strong. To rescue, save, and be strong. And while I'm saying all this, I love our men. So do not think that I'm trying to be the men all need saved and the women have to save. That's not what I'm getting at, okay, at all. You guys know me better than that anyway. But I think it's important to understand the strength. This is a warrior. This is almost like a military word where it's this is the one, this is the one that will rise up and protect even. And think about the differences even in our marriages. I'll speak for myself only. If my goal was to protect my husband and to rescue him like I'm talking emotionally, right? Like he doesn't need me like on a horse, like with a sword coming to rescue him like that. He doesn't need that. But our men, for those of us who are married, sometimes their hearts are more tender than what we either want to believe or that they think we can handle, right? And so they don't do. But what if we really saw our job was as someone who was to rise up and protect them when the enemy, whatever that is, either our spiritual enemy or the enemies of the world, which are kind of, the same thing, we're rising up against him. Like that, like I'm his complement in that, where he is weak, I am strong, and I can be strong for him in those places. It's from the word azar, A-Z-A-R, which means to surround, to protect, to aid, to help. So we can get helper from that, right? But we have to be careful that we don't like sell him short or sell ourselves short. It doesn't mean helper like, I don't know, assistant or something. I mean, it kind of, yeah, Maria's saying something. Ezer could be speaking to the emotional traits as women versus physical traits that other verses speak to others verses speak to. God wired us differently. Absolutely. Yes. And it also talks about assistance and support in times of hardship or distress. Assistance and support in times of hardship or distress. This is the kind. Go ahead.
Well, the one thing I would like to say is that, men are maybe a little more fragile than they realize.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've gotten this, I hate to say it, but a bad press.
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to be macho.
Mm-hmm.
The strong, silent type, never giving in to emotion or anything like that. And we're the emotional ones. We're the ones that cry and have a hissy fit and get all bent out of shape. But the thing of it is that we really do save them.
Mm-hmm.
How many times, behind every successful man, there's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
To shore him up, not to give him, not to give him flattery and
Mm-hmm.
false information, but to say, honey, you can do this. You've done a great job so far. You can do this.
And to even be willing to do that from our love for God, not always because of our love for him. And hopefully our love for him is existent, right? But I mean, for those of us who've been married a while, we know that a love is an action. It's a decision. It's not always a feeling, right? And so how do we provide that for him from that place, right? From that place of our devotion to God. And I think we have to be real careful, and we'll continue to talk about this as we unpack this marriage, talk about, marriage a little bit more. But I think we have to be real careful, even like with the men, in terms of what do we expect them based on what culture says a man is, and what do we expect of them based on what God says a man is? Like, and do we even really know the difference? I think we put a lot of our cultural expectations on women too. I mean, I'm just, because we're all this morning, at least women sitting here. I think that I just think it's an important thing to take a look at. So, let's see what else on this. Yeah, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
Laura here.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed, and maybe this is a little bit of a rabbit chase here, but
I doubt it.
we don't have to get into it. I'm just bringing it up. But it's just something that I've noticed at our church, with the men at our church, and when I think about it, with my dad also, that as I see men aging, I see that they are allowing their emotions to show more.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or
I don't know if that's it would be interesting. I just wonder if that is maybe it's tied into hormones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But it'd be interesting if somebody would sit and ponder on that a little bit about that change in many men, and then is there a parallel change in women as we to continue that helper, that protector or helper idea.
I think it's interesting as we age. I think there are a couple of roads that we can take, and this is just me talking, so I'm interested in what y'all think about this too. I think that especially if we're maturing as believers, then one of the things that happens to us is we become more at peace with who we are, more trusting of the Lord, and more like just confident that who we are is fine, like it is enough. I think when we're younger, a lot of us sort of strive for this, what will make me, what will define me, what will whatever. And some people outgrow that and some people don't. But I think, Laura, like let's just say the men who outgrow that maybe become less self-conscious of expressing feelings or emotions. And I don't mean just crying, but just like having
Just a hug.
harder conversations even, or more honesty, or more like let their guard down, I guess, for however that looks like in their life. And I think sometimes
The walls are starting to crumble.
yeah, maybe they come down a little bit. And I think the same is true with women, but often I think that often, like sometimes I think the men seem like they're getting like softer and the women seem like they're getting stronger because we become less, do you know what I mean? And I think both are getting stronger actually, but I think but there's this like understanding of actually what we feel and how we relate to God and how we relate to others is so important in our walk with Jesus. And I think it can be true for non-believers too, but I guess just for the sake of the discussion this morning, we'll stay there. But as we grow closer to Jesus and we become wanting to be more like him, the things that are the most beautiful in us are sometimes the things that we've suppressed or something over the years, right? But that begins to come, I don't know, what do you guys think? It becomes more comfortable to be able to say, this is how I feel, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is how I want to express my love for you, whatever.
Don't you think a lot of it has to do with the way our lives are and how things slow down in our life?
Yes.
Like take you and Matt.
Yes.
You are consumed with your kids, right?
Yes.
That takes up so much of your time.
Yes.
Don and I don't necessarily have that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have more time.
Yes.
To think about it.
Yeah.
To change your attitude.
Yeah.
I just think that probably has an awful lot to do with it. Just the fact that you have more time.
I think you're right. Yeah, and I think also how we have taken our difficult circumstances to God matters so much too, because we all know people who've gone through trials and become bitter and closed and hard, right? And we know people who've gone through really difficult things and become softer and more loving, or whatever. And so some of it is, I think, and I think that probably goes with the time also. Some, as we've had time to process the difficult things that life has brought us, how have we received God's peace, and how have we accepted he loved her so he delayed, that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, and I think all of that goes together, which is why I think we see it when we get older, because it takes time to.
I have a lot more years to look back on.
Yeah,
than you
yeah. It just takes time to marinate us, I guess. We're all marinated in something, so don't let it be too salty, whatever you're marinating in. Amen.
I just say, sometimes when I look back, I really cringe.
Yes.
And other times I can see.
I think that we would probably all say that if we're honest, right? There are seasons or spots in our life where we not so much. And then other times where we can celebrate the growth that we see. And, for me, as I'm always looking for how to make my life perfect. I'm getting better at not doing, I'm getting better at that as I get older. I know. It's like my personality. I'm like, if I just work harder, if I just do this, and there's this thing that's happening in me, or that has been happening in me, and part of it's just age, and part of it's like, it'll never happen, so I can't do. But that continues to, I continue to tell myself, like, whatever you offer the Lord, like, is not in vain, and your striving for perfection actually limits your ability to soak in and receive the blessings that are all around you. Sometimes you ignore all the things that are so good in your life because you're like, it's like a rabbit chasing a carrot that's always just a little bit, like, they're never going to catch it. You know what I mean? They're never going to get it. Like, don't be that. You'll die running and you're never going to get that carrot. But in the meantime, you've missed all this stuff along the way, right? And I don't want to do that. So I try to be real conscious of that in my life. And sometimes I get it right, and sometimes I cringe because I don't, right? So, okay, anything else on that before we move on to, let's look at, God created woman as a support parallel to the man, corresponding to him. This is what Maria was saying, different but equal. Mm-hmm. Okay, put that up there. One thing that I wanted to say, it talked about in Genesis 1 and 2, it says that God was not good for the man to be alone. Remember that? And he gave him this assistance, this support, this easer to keep him from being alone. And one of the things, not to just like be difficult or whatever, but there is, like, in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes about how it's better for people to stay single. Do you remember that? And that's one of the things we'll have to wrestle with as we move forward, because it's just not black and white. Like, it's just not black and white in some places.
Didn't Paul also say it's better to be wed than to burn?
Yes. Yeah, I'm totally paraphrasing, but he's like, listen, if you can't control yourselves, get married. But if you can, it's really better to stay single. Yeah. That's in 1 Corinthians.
We all followed that advice.
Yeah. And he also says, like, about sexual relationships in marriage, he's like, don't, like, stay apart very long, because that's not good for you. I don't remember what exact. It's in 1 Corinthians 7-9. I looked it up, but I didn't, like, make notes or whatever. But he talks about, don't deny yourselves very long. If you've denied yourself for whatever reason, then come back together. So he writes very straightforward on some of those things. Paul writes very straightforward on a lot of things. So page 55D, did we do that yet? 55, that's the one that was woman, right? Yeah, we talked about that already.
Yeah.
And then at the top, C, right above that was man. So, okay, so on 55, we looked up, like, male and female, and then we looked up the words that were like wife and husband, right? And how they use those in different times, yeah. And then at the bottom, it talks about how, at the bottom of Genesis 1, when a man shall leave, Genesis 2, is it Genesis 2? Yeah, leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And, it's interesting because Kay has a note in the study about how, like, this is where, like, marriage starts. And we talked about this, we touched on it last week, that this is about marriage for all who would come from him. But again, I just, maybe, but I also just want to say, but not like what we think of it. We have a cultural understanding of marriage, like, even in our country. I mean, even if you go to a different country, what marriage looks like is very different. I have a friend who used to live across the street from me, who's from Saudi Arabia, and they're Muslim. And, her marriage was arranged. I mean, they've got 7 children, and she's been having kids. She was married when she was, like, maybe 16 or something. And I'm not even sure, I can't remember for sure if she had met Suleiman before they were wed. But she certainly didn't pick him, I mean, the family's arranged that. And they have a marriage. They have a real marriage, and they're raising a real family. And in this culture, right, we would definitely say, that's not the right way to do. I think probably we all would say that's not the right way to do that. If we, what, honey? Joyce, say.
Western culture really is into romantic love.
Our culture is, yeah, and choice, yeah, and choosing,
but
yeah.
But also, so in many cases, because of the romantic love, we go into these relationships with rose-colored glasses and never really know who the person is. It's just all about how he makes me feel.
Sometimes, yeah.
And then, sometimes, unfortunately, it's a case of after they've been together a while, his true colors come out, and it's it's not the right person at all.
Yes, as do ours.
Most of the world, does do arranged marriages.
Yeah, I never I knew that a lot of places did that still, I guess, but that she's my first friend, I guess, that I've had, that I've watched her life, and my kids were friends with her kids, and all those things, and her marriage was the beginnings of it at least were so different than mine, and yet the current day situation of it isn't like terribly, it is because their faith is so different, but I mean, she's just a mom and a wife, and it's like that. But she told me a story about her sister, which was really interesting, because her sister had an arranged marriage, and it was very painful for her family because she was married a little while, and then her husband decided she wasn't a good wife for him, and so he sent her home, and it was awful for her. Like, it was a disgrace, kind of, like it didn't work out. And he had the ability to just say, no, I'm not going to stay married to her because she's not a good wife for me. And it reminded me of some of the things we've talked about, like with the woman at the well and being divorced 5 times, and how in Jewish culture you had to publicly say why she wasn't a fit wife and all this, and kind of the shame. And my friend was just telling me that's been really hard for their family and for her sister, and it's unlikely that she'll be able to get married or have children now, because for someone else to want to marry her is unlikely, because she's been, I don't know all the details about it, but it's just she's been
Stevich goods.
That's it didn't work out with that person, and so now
I used to work with a woman who was a Sikh from India.
Okay.
Her daughter went to school and became a pharmacist.
Okay.
She was born and raised in this country. She went back to India on a visit, and in the Sikh newspapers, it's basically, I'm looking for a wife, I'm looking for a husband. These are my criteria.
Mm-hmm.
She went through the matrimonial ads, found a nice young man who was already here.
Okay.
And within 3 or 4 weeks, they were married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just different in other places, and I think it's good to remember that it's been different in the culture, like in the Bible that we study, but it's different in other places here, even just today. So we can't. I think it's dangerous to put our cultural understanding of marriage, pick it up and just put it down and say, well, that's the only way, or that's the right way. So. What about on page 57, number 2? We looked up the word joined. We touched on this just a little bit already, but anything else that you learned about joined?
Well, just had cleave to and hold fast.
Cleave to, hold fast. I had
somewhere in there, wherever I looked it up, because I have a frown face beside it, says to overtake.
I saw that one too. Overtake, yeah. And sometimes I was watching this thing on Hebrew language just earlier this week, and it talked about how so many Hebrew words, like most Hebrew words, are like a suitcase that is overstuffed. Like there's too much in there, and a lot of Hebrew words are used. The same word is used in the meanings are very big. And also they're used in different ways, so, but I saw that too. Overtake, follow close, catch by pursuit was another thing that I found. But also abide fast. The word abide came up, and abide always piques my interest because that's like a continual closeness, continually, in love with. And again, like Donna, I don't mean like a romantic love, but like an action love, like continual process. So let's jump into page 57, number 3 at the bottom. And this is where we wade in pretty deep on some of this stuff. And I guess I just I've thought a lot about how to present this, because I really am serious about not coming with a particular agenda. But I want to say that this passage in Ephesians that we looked at, 22 to 23 in chapter 5, is probably, and you can look this up and, you know, write these things down and look them up later because you're like, what did she say? Or I want to know more about that. But it is considered one of the most complicated passages of scripture in the Bible by like Bible scholars. It is highly debated in both friendly and non-friendly ways. And you will find, if you do any research at all, very, what I would consider sound opinions on very different sides of understanding of what this means. So we're going to touch on it today, and I mean, I'm happy to look at it any way that you guys want to, but I'm just going to say there is no way in one study, like on day 3, page 57, that we can find one thing in there and like pull that out and say, well, that's what it means. I mean, this has been a scripture that people have wrestled with forever, you know, and it is really considered one of the most complicated passages in the Bible. And one of the things that I will say bothered me about this line of questioning right from the beginning was on page 56, number 5. And this may not bother you at all, and I am certainly not trying to tell you it needs to bother you, but this is a red flag to me when I see something like this. Because what the study says is, as you look at these verses, about halfway in that question, it says, please do not get wrapped up in head coverings, but instead stick to the relationship of the man and the woman. And the reason that kind of thing is a red flag to me is because I don't think we get to pick and choose what we take literally. If someone is going to say the Bible is literal and it doesn't contradict itself, then I think that it's really not okay to say, except we're not going to focus on this part, we're going to focus on this part, right? It kind of either is or isn't. If you read this chapter, this passage in 5:22 and to 33, I would say if you're that concerned with the order of hierarchy that you're going to pull out from this, then why aren't you concerned with the fact that I don't cover my head when I go into worship? I guess I just pose that as a question. And again, you do not have to agree with me. That does not have to bother you or be, you know, a sticking point for you. But I struggle anytime. The people whose opinions I respect the most on something that's challenging are the people who say, let me present it from this side, and let me present it from this side, and then let me tell you kind of, you know, like they're not afraid of saying it's just complicated and we wrestle with it and we don't really know. You know, for instance, like in 1 Timothy chapter 2 is where we find that women are to be silent and not to teach. But in the passage in 1 Corinthians, it talks about how when they pray and prophesy. And to the best of my understanding, Paul wrote both of those things, right? So if they're to be silent, and you can unpack it, you can research that, read about it, and you will find people that explain it or don't, or, you know, continue to wrestle with it or whatever. But I guess I'm just saying that the issue is complicated enough that I think it deserves it just deserves to be handled with a lot of care.
Angie, I had a sermon once.
Yeah, go ahead.
Said that we always look at the part that women are to be subjective to their husbands and everything. But at the time this was written, marriages were arranged, and women were just personal property, basically, to men.
Yes.
So the unusual part of this sermon, that Paul is writing, is that for men to
love their wives. Oh yes, yeah,
and they don't really pick that out, especially where I grew up in a Pentecostal church.
Yes,
it was all about women being subjective to husbands and everything.
Yeah,
and this was a Pentecostal minister that said the outstanding thing about this sermon was that men were to love their wives as themselves.
Yep. You know, and I there are people like so many of the complicated issues in the church. I'll just be honest. There are people that I really respect, and I believe that they love Jesus, who see this very differently. So again, like the one thing that I don't have an agenda in terms of I want our group or something to see things a certain way. I just really want us to be willing to wrestle with when something pushes on us or something is complicated, sometimes the safest thing, and if you guys saw the little thing that I wrote on Facebook before, I'm going to share this graphic with you. Sometimes the safest thing to do is to take a black and white answer and try to convince other people to agree with you, and then you're like safe, right? This is the way it says. I can support this like this. We're not going to look at the other things. Don't look at the head coverings thing like this, you know what? And when we can get a group of people that believe it the same, then we don't have to wrestle with it. And I guess the one thing, if I have an agenda, it is wrestle with it. Continue to read about it, research it, think about it. I think in the study, it seems to, let's see if you guys agree with me, it seems to really be pointing that precept is saying marriage is between a man and a woman the way that we know marriage in our country, like, that's it. And I pulled up this graphic, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. And for those of you watching on Facebook, if you didn't see it yet, the graphic for this marriage thing that we're going to talk about just real quick is in the Facebook feed. So it's there for you if you wanted it or if you haven't printed out. So I'm going to share this screen just to show you. Can you guys see that?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So this is just something that I saw a while back that I just thought was really interesting, because these are some different examples of marriage in the Bible. Like, of course, there's man and woman. That's number one. You see that right there? I just want to make sure you guys can see it. And then number two over here is man plus a brother's widow. Do you remember that story? It's other places.
Yes.
But you remember Genesis 36, when a man dies and they didn't have a son, then the next son is her husband. And she is to submit sexually to that man, right? So that's an example of marriage in the Bible. Number three is man plus wives plus concubines. All right, we look at, like even looking at Abraham. Well, that's actually, that would be like woman's property. I'm trying to read the ones that are right here. It says Solomon, Gideon, Abraham had 2 concubines, Nahor, Jacob. So, Jacob had a concubine after Rachel died. So that is acceptable marriage. Now, and again, is this acceptable? Is this the way that Tamar? Yes, that's the Genesis 30. I think it's 36 in Genesis, Lisa. Yeah. Does this mean because we studied in the Bible that it's acceptable that this is the way God wanted marriage? I don't know. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these are culturally acceptable responses to marriage at that time, right? Then also, then man plus woman.
Solomon must have been a busy man if he had 700 wives and 300.
Yes. Yeah.
300 concubines.
Well,
when did he ever get time?
Well, and remember, and it had at that point, like if you're looking at the man plus wives plus concubines, that didn't have anything to do with relationship. That had to do with cultural status. In that, I think we touched on this last week. A king's strength, one of the measures of a king's strength was his like sexual ability, right? So the more women that he had that were his to claim, not relationally but sexually, was an indication to the nations around him that he was strong, right? And that the nation was strong. And so it doesn't, but they were like married by cultural standards, right? A man, number 4 here, a rapist and his victim. You will find in Deuteronomy that it says in there that a virgin who is raped must marry her rapist, and then the rapist must pay the victim's father 50 shekels of silver for property loss. This was a marriage, okay, by cultural standards. 5, a man plus a woman plus a woman's property. It is actually understood, like Abraham, I might have said this before, when he had a son with Hagar, or when Jacob had sons with his wives, slaves, there is some cultural understanding that she would have both been inseminated and given birth on the lap of the wife who would claim the child. Okay? There's nothing about that is honoring that. Yeah, I mean, that's just that you're my property, so I will do this, and then I'll take your child, right, from you, and it'll actually be my child. Let's see, 6, a male soldier and a prisoner of war. number 7, a man plus multiple women. We were just talking about that. But again, like Jacob had 2 wives that were sisters. And then both of those sisters had slaves, or like we like to say they're handmaidens, or like, you know, whatever. They're slaves. And he had children with them as well. And but again, like, here's the thing about God, right? Because those children of Jacob's are how the tribes of the nation of Israel are established, right? So God uses the things that we do for his glory, even though. And then, like, here's a male slave and a female slave, where slaves could be like, I think an owner could, you know, marry his slaves with no, I mean, just because they were slaves, now you're married or whatever. So, and again, I share that graphic, I think what I said in the little note, like on the Facebook page, was that we have defined marriage by cultural standards forever, right? We've made it okay based on whatever was happening in our culture for a long time. So, like, thoughts or anything. How do we wrestle with this? Like, based on maybe, I don't know what you felt when you were doing the lesson this week, but I think it was obvious that Precept was leading us one direction. I feel like that. But how do we wrestle with, that's one direction, and maybe that's our direction, but then this is true also, this like graphic of other ways that marriage was at least what am I trying to say, like acted on or played out in Bible stories.
Angie,
yeah,
I looked up we were talking last week about, or I asked the question, are there still multiple marriages?
Yes.
In the world today? I mean, we know the Mormons.
Yes.
And I looked it up afterwards, and it's everywhere.
Is it? Mm-hmm.
They're in Africa.
Yes.
And still in the Middle East.
Okay.
I was really surprised.
From like everyday people, Mary Ellen, or like mostly like kings or something like that. Do you know?
That
don't know. Okay. Yeah, just curious. Yeah. Are you guys? I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna go back to the others screen now again. So, I think if I have one caution, it's just like what I said earlier. I think we just need to be careful about. Sometimes there are powerful voices, especially within our churches, that say,
yes,
this is the right way to view something, and it's
the only way.
Yeah, Joyce, I appreciate you saying that, because that's what I've experienced, that this is the right way, and if you're not in step with this, then you don't really belong here. No. And it's riskier to wrestle with it, sometimes the church really rewards us when we have that black and white understanding, but I just really encourage us to keep rest. It's not the only hard thing, to wrestle with in the Bible by any means. So,
I had really never thought about the fact that Jacob's wives, that became the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
I had really not thought about that.
Yeah.
Before. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you think about...
that was...
Go ahead, Joyce. Heller, yeah.
Well, I had that written on the bottom of the Genesis 2, and I don't know why I wrote it. I had Jacob. 12 tribes came from his 2 wives, who were sisters, and his 2 slaves.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it last week even. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we might have.
That's where I got.
I think we might have talked about David too, because I don't know what number wife Bathsheba was for David. I don't know the number, but not one. I know that. But their child, the one that she was pregnant with, because he saw her and brought her to him, and and all that, died. But then she stayed his wife, and they had King Solomon. And. That's not wife number 1. Like, his first wife was Saul's daughter, and then after they were separated because Saul was pursuing him and all that. She was married to someone else, and then it seemed like for a while he like wanted to claim her and bring her back. You guys, Michael, M-I-C-H, or Michael, M-I-C-H-A-L. I don't know the details of the story, but that's kind of like an interesting story. And then you remember maybe for those of you who studied 1 Samuel with me, there was the story about, was it Nabor? So it started with an N, and he was all mad because David wanted his sheep, and Abigail came and talked him down or whatever, and then he married Abigail, whatever, and he was already married. I don't even know that was number 2. I can't even remember, but he has, and he is, what is he called? We call him a man after God's own heart. Yeah, so I guess, and that doesn't mean he was getting it right. Like, I'm not trying to lift up his marriage decisions. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I think there's a lot of times when we get it wrong that God still uses us and sometimes the product of our wrong for good things, because that when we confess that wrong, that Psalm 51:10 that I keep going back to, because it says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and it's that bara creator. Maybe I said this last week, I don't remember. But that create in me, that Psalm 51 is the psalm that David penned in response to his understanding that his sin with Bathsheba and killing her husband, when the prophet Nathan confronted him with that, and his heart was wrecked over it. Those words from Psalm 51 are what he penned after that. So that created me a clean heart. And again, I go back to this, David wasn't a man after God's own heart because he got it right all the time. He was a man after God's own heart because when he recognized he was wrong, he repented and he worked to restore the relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I have never really watched Sister Wives, but we know for the most part, more than one wife doesn't really work real well most of the time.
I know, I was talking about Sister Wives last week.
Well,
yeah.
And
it fascinates me. Yeah.
When I'm sitting here looking at this, it says that a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they'll become one flesh. But it really doesn't say only one, does it? I mean, so maybe that is pertaining to however many wives you take. That's a relationship you're supposed to have. But when it says they will become one flesh, it's hard for 3 people to fit in there.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And I don't have anything. I don't have an easy, if you're waiting for me to be like, and so this is the answer, it ain't coming.
I think it's a very complicated thing, and there's no clear answer.
Yeah, which is why I think it deserves the respect of wrestling and studying. And go ahead, Helen.
I think it's interesting that when I looked up after last week, there's 88 countries that have polygamy.
Okay.
But there's a word that's very similar that it means one wife with multiple husbands, and that's illegal every place. I found that interesting.
88 countries recognize polygamy, but for a wife to have multiple husbands is illegal everywhere in the world.
Right.
Interesting. I don't have anything to say to that.
The male must have made that up.
Oh, my word. Oh, that's funny.
I don't know. I just found that kind of interesting.
No, that is interesting. It is interesting. It's all just stuff that I think, we have to be careful sometimes about what we think we know. Yeah.
Angie, I think
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about this before, and I'm going to try to be more attuned to it, but it's interesting that in the Old Testament, there were so many relationships that were defined, for lack of a better word, that were mentioned, but in the New Testament, I'm not sure that there were really all that many male-female relationships that were really clearly defined.
Yeah.
Defined's not the right word.
Yeah.
Just documented.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Word.
Yeah, we see some, like, the question, I think it was in our study this week about, which husband would be hers in heaven, like with all the brothers that die. Remember when Jesus is like posed that question, and then like the woman at the well who is divorced 5 times, and the woman caught in adultery who is going to be stoned, which we'll get that in just a second. The stoning. You know, there are some instances where we get a glimpse, a snapshot of the culture in terms of what was like deemed bad or wrong, you know. But I agree with you, Laura. There's not like this, like, here's what it should look like. I don't think that's ever really set up for us, like black and white like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, just even to take it a step further, I mean, there's so many specific examples, and I'm not trying to make a case.
Yeah,
you know,
I know. Yeah.
Either just observation I hadn't thought about before, that in the chart you had that you put
Yes.
up, it had all these actual names, and
Yes.
and we know
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, it specified this was a concubine.
You're right.
that,
Yes.
second wife. This was a sister to, you know, they were both wives. But in the New Testament, I'm not so sure that there are really very many.
There aren't as many stories or characters in the New Testament in general, especially save the Gospels.
Right.
There's a lot of stories in the Gospels, but once you get past Jesus's resurrection, and there's a lot of stories in Acts, and then you begin to get the letters where there are like kind of hints at stories, and there are people mentioned because they're serving Christ, right? But there's not as many, the unfolding of like the stories and the characters. I mean, like, for, you know, I'm teaching in Genesis right now, or in at church also later in Genesis. You know, we've been talking about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob we stopped during Lent, but like, you know, weeks and weeks we're just talking about like the character of these stories. And Joseph's story is like something from, you know, 35, 40 to 50. Like, you know, it's just like, that's all just the stories of Joseph's life, you know, and we don't really have stories like that about people's lives and their descendants and all that, like we do in the Old Testament. So, yeah. Let's look at page 58, number 6. Oh, yes, and here's just another cultural thing, which I don't want to like camp on for too long, but this was an issue about divorce. When he was saying, Jesus was saying that it was wrong to separate the one flesh. At least that's what I wrote down, that Jesus is saying that it's wrong to separate the one flesh. And I wrote in the comment, like, all of this brings in a lot of personal opinions and assumptions as well, because you think about like the ways that our culture, I would argue, how long ago has divorce been something that was taboo? What do you guys think? Like, because there was a time in our culture that was taboo, right? What do you think? How long has that been?
Since World War II.
Since World War II? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, I found out many years after the fact that my grandparents had been divorced.
Uh-huh.
Now, they were my grandmother was Catholic.
Uh-huh.
And so here she is, this scarlet woman,
Uh-huh.
living at home with a child,
Uh-huh.
and she was divorced.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah.
She did ultimately remarry my grandfather,
Uh-huh.
which was her biggest mistake.
Sorry, that's not what I expected you to say next. I'm sorry. Well, and I don't say that to point out anything except for culturally our understanding of the rights and wrongs of marriages changes over time.
That's right. Even though he was an abusive husband, he was a husband, and she was a scarlet woman.
Yeah.
You know, she couldn't take communion. She was barely allowed in church.
Because of her divorce?
Yes.
Because of her divorce.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when she remarried my grandfather, and it was because it was the same husband, so there was no problem, and with the church as far as they were concerned. So I mean, she went on, and but it was, and that was in the 20s or early 30s.
Okay. Yeah. So our culture does change through the generations, and I think some
There are
people.
ways,
Go ahead, Helen.
now there are ways too that people interpret different things.
Uh-huh.
I know that when it talks about an elder or deacon, I'm not sure which,
Yeah.
she'll be the husband of one
One wife. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Somebody that was being asked to be a deacon in our church said no because he was divorced.
Uh-huh.
And it was because his wife, ran around on him while he was in World War II.
Uh-huh.
But he did not feel like he could because that scripture said he could not be the husband of two wives.
Okay.
On the other hand, somebody else that was divorced and remarried felt like it meant at one time.
Uh-huh.
you know.
Well,
So, everything,
mm-hmm.
people have an interpretation
Sure.
that fits their needs.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And
Who's to say which is right?
and and here's the thing. I don't know. I don't have a solid answer to who is right, except for I know throughout the scriptures, especially if you focus on the gospel lessons, over and over again, the people that the culture thought were wrong were invited into the presence of Jesus, and he loved them. Yeah, I'm just saying, he invited them into his presence. He went to their home. He dined with them. They followed him, and he loved them. And so, I guess ultimately, when we ask the question, what's right or wrong, our first question should be, go back to that, what does love require of me in this situation? Because that's ultimately the mark of a Jesus follower, is that we love and really love. And yeah, that's all. I'm going to say that. Let's talk just a little bit as we're wrapping up about the defiling sins worthy of death. That sounds like a good place to end. Page 60. Page 60D was what we were talking about, being pleasing to God. And it talked about how people could be stoned for certain sexual sins that were punishable by death. And I printed off this little article, and I wanted to share just a couple things with you about stoning. If for those of you who studied Acts with me, you might remember that the martyr Stephen was stoned. You remember that? And we talked a little bit about what stoning was then. But basically, a lot of times they would put someone down, if I understand right, they'd put someone down like in a little like a valley or something, and then like actually push these heavy stones on top of them. It wasn't just like throwing probably sometimes it was throwing stones at them, but there was actually like this crushing kind of thing. Like, it was a horrible way to die. And this little article just says that stoning seems to have been associated with sins that caused irreparable damage to the spiritual or ceremonial purity of a person or an animal. Okay? And so things that you could be stoned for in the Old Testament were murder, idolatry, approaching near to Mount Sinai when the presence of God was there, the occult, blaspheming the name of the Lord, and some sexual sins. But again, if we go back to why God was so serious about these things in the Old Testament, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, how are they associated with sins that cause, this is the key, irreparable damage to the spiritual or ceremonial purity of a person? Irreparable damage. And I would argue that, like a lot of the sexual sin that God talks about in the Old Testament that is like punishable by death, it is because one person is controlling or abusive over another person. You've got a dominant person that is taking advantage of like a weaker person. And I think you think about abuse in our culture today. Why is it never okay that a psychiatrist sleeps with his or her patient? Why is it never okay for a teacher and a student? Why is it never okay for an older relative or whatever for a young girl? Why is that never okay? Because there's no opportunity to say yes. Like, you can't, even if she says yes, or he. It can be the other way too. And I totally recognize that. But even if the person says yes, they actually aren't in a position where they can say no, right? And I think there's something about all of these things that have to do with like dominance and what am I trying to say? You guys know what I'm trying to say?
Basically,
I kind of got tripped up on my
have
own.
no choice.
Yeah, no
God
choice.
has given
Yeah.
us free choice, but that situation takes this free choice
Mhm.
away from the weaker member of the
Mhm.
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of these things, first, like idolatry and approaching near Mount Sinai, I mean, we have a choice to participate in those things, but I think the overall thing is that there's this irreparable damage, and I think the no choice thing in the sexual sins is a big part of that. And then on the flip side, it says, a rapist has to marry his victim, so I don't,
If she's the virgin.
then we get, then we get all caught up
Yeah.
on that. Doesn't make sense either, so. But anyway, and I think if the stoning story that I always think about so much though is in John 8, where the woman is caught in adultery. They do this for Jesus to trick Jesus, right, or try to trip him up, and they pull this woman out in front of him and say, she's been caught in adultery, and what does it say we should do, and what does Jesus say about the stoning?
Cast the first stone.
Yeah, the one of you that is without sin can cast the first stone. And in the Old Testament, in order for a stoning to happen, I believe you had to have 2 witnesses or 2 accusers or something, and those people who would stand and testify and be the witnesses were the ones that had to throw the first stones. You can check me on that, but I believe that's right. So there's this idea that if this is serious enough that we're actually going to do this, then those who are bringing the accusations have to do it first, so. What else? We have just a few more minutes left. We covered a lot of ground today, I think. What about my ladies that are watching on Facebook? Any other thoughts or comments or?
It wasn't quite so bad as you were anticipating it to be, was it?
What's really good for me is when I'm able to put a little space. When I first was doing the lesson, I kind of got my back up a little bit. Is that the right way to say that? Because I struggle when someone seems to be pushing one point of view. And I've told you that about Kay and Precept a couple other times when I'm like, I feel like sometimes there's a couple things that they're really strong on that sometimes I feel like they pull in even when maybe that's not even like the point or something. And every once in a while I just get, I struggle a little bit with it, and then I get the reason that I worry about it is because I get nervous. I get nervous that I won't be black and white enough about it, and people will criticize me, and then I don't know what play it out. I don't even know what's gonna. But I get nervous because I feel like the easy thing to say is yes, here's the hierarchy, and no, don't behave this way, and and all that. And I'm like, it's just not that black and white to me. And to be able to say it that way and to invite people to wrestle with it and say, I don't believe it's that black and white, and I think there are other opinions that are valid too. It's a risk for me, and it scares me a little bit. I'm just being honest. So when I approach these things, and it's so funny because I'm like, who am I afraid of? I'm not afraid of y'all, but but because I'm so honest with you guys that I'm like, I don't know. What do I always say? I know just enough to be dangerous. But I think it means so much to me. Like, I so bad, and I'll just be honest, and then we'll close. I so bad want to honor God with my life. And I so much want to handle the privilege He's given me to teach with such care. And I don't ever want to lead anyone wrong. But I don't want to lead anyone wrong. But I also have to be honest about the fact that He's done a mighty work on my heart and really said some things that you grew up believing isn't really the way that I would do things, and it scares me a little bit to be honest about that. Step out there. Yes, because I know there are powerful voices that would say, you're wrong, and I've been on the receiving end of those powerful voices, and it hurts, and to be criticized for not leading people well is something that just it just scares me, because I don't do it because I have an agenda of trying to look behind me and see all these people following me. I really just do studying the Bible has saved my life. I just mean it. It has saved my life, and it has changed my heart so much. And the only thing that I want to do is here's where I was, here's what God did, here's where I am, and just invite people along for that journey as well, and create in them a desire to study. And so, anyway, but there's a lot in there that's tricky. And it's safer to just say, oh, I have all the answers. And reality is I don't. It's safer to align yourself with somebody, you know, I think, like, if I were just to say, everything Kay says is exactly what I agree with. And I mean, there's a reason that I don't show her videos in class. And the reason is, if I'm really honest, is almost every lesson, especially at least at some point in every study, she goes off on a tangent that I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. And so therefore I don't want that to be a part of my class. And if you all want to watch them, I think that's so great, right? You know, like I have learned so much from watching her. I watched them all when I was younger, you know, and I've learned so much from them. But now I'm just like, oh, it's just so black and white for me, you know. So anyway.
Well, you've grown.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the growing is, you know, the stretching and the growing is risky sometimes, or hard, or whatever. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, but that's probably why most of us are here. You know, I'm here because of the fact that it's not black and white for you, that we can discuss
Yes.
it, and we can
Good. Yeah.
work good.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can agree to disagree
Absolutely.
without any shame. You know, if
Yes.
there's no I'm right, you're
No.
wrong attitude.
No, I just don't feel that way at all. Because we're all just in a process, and the reality is, one of the scariest things about teaching. And poor Joyce, she knew me when my sermons were the worst. But you know, when I was practicing to preach, I'm still practicing to preach. But you know, like I don't even know half the things I said there. I'm probably like, that's not even right. But I was doing the best then, and I'm doing the best now, right? Like that's all. You can only speak from what you know. So I know Mary Ellen has a doctor's appointment, and it's 10:30. I know, and I'm gonna pray and let you go. All right, Holy Father, thank you so much for this time, and for the honesty, and for just the ability to wrestle with the hard things. And you and I have spent a lot of time just kind of thinking and praying over this lesson, because at first I just wanted a way out, but you know, you get to a point where you're just able to say, this is what I believe, this is what I understand based on where I am right now, and Lord, just open my heart to where I might be wrong, where I miss it, or the more I learn about you, Lord, the more I know that I have to learn. And so I think that's true for all of us, God, and I'm so grateful for a place where we can bring what we're learning and just sift through it a little bit, God. Ultimately, Lord, all we want is to be able to connect our heart with your heart, and I know that you honor that, and you are patient with us, and so we just appreciate that, God. So I lift up our study this week as we move into this next part of Genesis, Lord, and continue to ask that you be with us as the shelter in place is still in effect, and what that's doing to all of our lives, Lord. And we thank you for loving us, and we thank you for walking with us through all kinds of seasons of our life, Lord, and we lift this all up to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.
Thank you so much. I gotta go.
All right. See you guys later.
Bye, guys.
Goodbye, Lisa Marie, if you're still watching.
Tulips